The night Lena called from the conference lobby, her laughter clinked like ice in a glass that wasn't mine. I stood in our kitchen in Karachi, phone on speaker, steam shivering up from a late cup of chai, and watched the thumbnails ripple in our shared cloud album. Silent postcards that didn't match her words. Arman. You're overthinking, I told myself, even as Rafi's name flickered at the edge of a memory, like a street lamp with a bad wire. Then one photo opened. The hotel window, the reflection. A silhouette inside the glass, wearing a watch I knew too well. I swallowed the metallic taste of denial and asked about her panel schedule. She laughed again. Light, rehearsed. The sound of a door closing softly. The city outside breathed sirens and motorcycles. Inside, our fridge hummed like a judge clearing its throat. The truth had already posed for the camera. All I had to do was stop pretending it blinked. Morning arrives like an apology that doesn't personalize your name. Arman replays the call while the city unveils its color. Buses groaning awake. Sparrows stitching sound between balconies. The newspaper slapping the door like a verdict. He tells himself it could be a coincidence. 2 watches, similar taste, urban uniform. But the small facts mutiny. Rafi's text from last week. Brother, proud of you. Suddenly hums with static. Arman drafts a message to Lena and deletes it. Drafts another to Rafi and deletes that too. He remembers the vows, the leased car, the plant on their windowsill that leans toward the light no matter who opens the curtains. He decides to do what the truth seems to want. Stop hiding and look straight at it, frame by frame. Final cut. He opens the laptop and zooms in until pixels turn into confession. He traces timelines the way investigators trace tire marks after rain. Lena said rehearsals, then dinner with colleagues, then late-night debrief in the lobby. The photos insist otherwise. Room, window, glass, shadow. Arman prints the frames like relics, lines them on the table, and realizes love can be both holy and hazardous. A candle carried through a narrow alley. He hears Rafi's voice in old audio notes. Ridiculous jokes, taxi horns, warmth that felt like safety, and grief whips around with a double edge. Loss of a partner and the friend who would have steadied him. Final cut. Arman circles the watch face in ink, the line a tremble that hardens into a decision. No more alibis. He remembers the first time he introduced Lena to Rafi. The easy laughter. The way their eyes mapped the room differently and somehow found the same exits. Arman had believed in that harmony. Now the same memory drops like a plate. He wonders whether betrayal begins with a glance or with the first withheld sentence. The answer won't change the bruise. He texts Lena. Call when you're free. He texts Rafi. Need to talk. He stares at both screens until the vibrations arrive, one after the other, like footsteps down a corridor he can't avoid. Final cut. He chooses Lena first. Her voice arrives lined with airport announcements and tired bravado. She says the seminar went long. She says the city is beautiful in the rain. Arman's questions arrive calmly, like placing cups on a table before pouring. What floor is your room? What's the view? Who's there with you? The silence between answers is not empty. It is crowded. A boarding call blares. She says she'll explain at home. He says they'll need the truth sooner than that. The call ends without goodbye, and the apartment exhales. Final cut. Arman pockets his keys. The decision hits like a clean chord in a song he's avoided playing. Arman books a morning train to Lahore, not out of rage, but to stand inside the room where the story bent. The carriage rocks and he lets memory sift. Lena's first pressed jasmine in a book. Rafi's habit of tapping rhythms on tabletops, all their lives braided into a rope sturdy enough to climb. Until someone started sawing quietly. At night. He stares out at fields dissolving into industry, a horizon that refuses to stay put. The plan is simple. Find the hotel, ask for records, Follow the fingerprints of ordinary things. If love is a ledger, he wants to see the numbers without the ornaments. Final cut. He rehearses a single sentence. Tell me the whole thing. And watches it sharpen like a blade in the reflection of the window. Lahore smells like rain just finished and promises just beginning. The hotel lobby is a theater of quiet transactions. Card slips, practiced smiles, luggage built to outlast vows. Arman approaches the desk and uses the currency of confidence. He asks for Lena's billing copy, an innocuous duplicate, mentions a misplaced receipt. The clerk hesitates the way a curtain pauses before it falls. Paper emerges. A corridor of facts. Dates, room service, 2 breakfasts, late-night charge for a whiskey he knows is not hers. The world does not thunder. It arranges itself neatly. Final cut. Arman folds the paper like a small flag and pockets it as if burying a soldier. The elevator mirrors tell their side of the story. Angles within angles. A man fractured, but standing. On Lena's floor, he finds the hallway that his eyes already know from the photos. A housekeeper passes, and kindness opens a door that rules would close. The room smells of citrus cleaner and something like the last page of a book. He does not rummage. He observes the view, the glass, the nightstand, the ghost of 2 people who thought they were invisible. He sits on the bed and feels the impression of an absence. He wants to hate and cannot. He wants to forgive and cannot. Final cut. He sets his phone on the nightstand, presses record, and tells the room what it did to him. Rafi arrives because Arman asked, because they were once brothers in everything but blood and bankruptcy. The meeting happens in a tea stall, tucked under an overpass where conversations can hide. Rafi's first words collapse into the steam. He says it wasn't planned. He says it was loneliness, dressed as opportunity. He says he hated every minute that wasn't the minutes themselves. Arman hears truths shaped to pass through throats. He doesn't shout. He builds a quiet with his breath and places Rafi's name inside it, like a fragile cup. They talk in circles until the circles widen into a road. Final cut. Arman slides the printed folio across the metal table, a document and a mirror, and watches Rafi's eyes accept their own reflection. Lena meets Arman in a quiet park where banyan roots hold the ground like old promises. She begins with apologies that have rehearsed too many mirrors. He waits for the unpracticed syllables, the ones that sweat. They arrive in fits. The distance between their schedules, the silence that grew like ivy, the night she mistook gratitude for gravity. Pain becomes a low sky, and yet beneath it he feels a small draft of air from a door he has not considered. The door to his own future that requires neither punishment nor permission. He tells her he will not decide today. He tells her the truth costs more than a single meeting. Final cut. As the light tilts gold, he stands and says the first honest mercy he can manage. I will heal with or without you. The ride back to Karachi is a corridor of reflections. Window, face, past, each passing pole a metronome counting down to a different life. Arman rehearses boundaries out loud, the words small and stubborn as seedlings. Space, honesty, consequence. For a mile or two, he wants to erase everything. Then he wants to understand every stitch. The city's edge blooms in sodium halos, familiar and changed. He can't fix yesterday on the platform. He can choose how he steps off the train. Final cut. As the brakes sing their metal hymn, he decides to sleep in the spare room and let the silence do some talking. Home is careful tonight. Lena stands in the doorway, apology softened into fatigue. They don't fight. They build a scaffold of rules, separate rooms, honest timelines, no sudden edits to the truth. The apartment seems to widen with each agreement. Somewhere under the floorboards, a crack stops spreading. He notices how her shoulders drop when he says he will not punish, only protect. He notices how his own breathing evens when he chooses clarity over performance. Final cut. He carries his pillow to the spare room and closes the door gently enough that it doesn't pretend to be forgiveness. Morning brings paperwork light, the kind that shows dust and fingerprints. Armand sits across from a counselor who doesn't chase his sentences, just listens until the shape appears. He names things he has dodged. Loneliness that wore achievement like armor. Resentment that disguised itself as patience. A friendship that became a staircase to the wrong floor. The counselor asks what healing would look like if no one else changed. The question lands like a clean floor after rain. Final cut. He writes 3 verbs on a yellow pad: rest, rebuild, release, and underlines them until the ink insists. By afternoon, he drafts an email that is not an ultimatum but a map. A trial separation, shared finances accounted, counseling options side by side with custody, plans for the small rituals they built. Groceries, Sunday calls to his aunt, watering the plant that insists on light. He keeps deleting adjectives until the sentences are sturdy enough to stand without decorations. He reads it once as a lover, once as a lawyer, and once as the person he promised himself he would become. Final cut. He clicks send and watches the whoosh draw a line he can finally see. Night finds him on the roof, where the city exhales heat and music from a dozen unseen speakers. He calls Rafi, not to reopen the wound but to stitch its edges. He says there will be space for a long time. He says he hopes they both learn something that doesn't require breaking a third person to remember. The call ends quieter than it began. He pockets the phone and lets the wind comb his thoughts. Somewhere a kite tugs the line and then mercifully finds its breeze. Final cut. He looks up and says the only prayer that feels true: thank you for the lesson, and please help me use it well. Morning unspools like thread from a spool he's finally holding. Armand makes breakfast for one, then makes a second plate out of habit and leaves it covered. A ritual halfway between goodbye and grace. Lena appears in the doorway. Hair wet. Apology quiet as the drip from her sleeve. They speak like architects now. Demarcations, timelines. Which walls carry load, which can come down without the roof collapsing. She asks if there is any version where they try again. He doesn't say no. He says not like before. A midpoint is still a choice. Final cut. They draft a calendar on paper, black squares for separation days, blue for counseling, green for breathing room, and sign their initials as if notarizing a truce. He meets a lawyer in a quiet office that smells like ballpoint ink and restraint. The law doesn't heal. It arranges. Armand learns words that make emotions hold still. Petition, community property, interim order. Each syllable feels both sterile and strangely merciful, like clean gauze. He is asked what he wants. Not revenge, he says. Not a reassure. A clean ledger and a kind exit if the bridge cannot bear both of them. The lawyer nods the way professionals nod when the patient has already diagnosed the fracture. Final cut. Armand leaves with a folder that weighs less than his phone but more than last week's denial. At dusk, Rafi steps into the same rooftop where they once grilled skewers and argued about cricket statistics. There are no skewers now. There is only wind and the weight of what remains. Rafi tries to hand him a confession wrapped as explanation. Armand lets it pass through, like smoke. He asks for something else. A boundary that honors the years without borrowing from tomorrow. They speak the way climbers speak across a crevasse. Careful, loud enough to be heard, never pretending there isn't a drop. Final cut. They agree on silence for a season, a rare friendship sabbatical with no guarantee of return, and all the dignity of not pretending. The apartment becomes a museum of choices. Armand and Lena sort objects into 3 boxes: keep, offer, release. The process is a film without music. The mug from Marie. The sweater that loved the wrong perfume. The plant that refuses to die. Sometimes they laugh at the same memory and the room warms. A trick light that fades if stared at too long. Sometimes they pause and breathe, letting a small ache pass like a bus that doesn't stop here anymore. Final cut. Armand holds a framed photo, slides it from its glass, returns the frame to the keep box, and feeds the paper to a shallow flame in a metal bowl on the balcony, watching it curl into a softer truth. At midnight, when the city tucks its noise under thin blankets, Armand writes a letter he wants sent. He addresses it to the man he will be in a year. And the boy who believed love solved math. It never learned to count. He thanks them for staying. He forgives them for guessing. He promises to feed his body, to call his aunt, to learn to cook the dish he always outsourced to Lena's talent for cardamom. He ends with a vow to practice joy without an audience. Final cut. He tapes the letter inside the back cover of a blank notebook and sleeps like a house after rain, quiet, anchored, open to morning. The week opens like a door that doesn't creak anymore. Armand stands in a community kitchen class because his promises asked for verbs. Cardamom, cumin, coriander. He says, each like a prayer with ingredients. A stranger laughs at his clumsy knife grip and shows him how to curl his fingers. He hadn't planned on feeling useful, but usefulness arrives wearing an apron and smelling like browned onions. He imagines feeding his own hunger without bargaining with ghosts. Final cut. As steam fogs his glasses, he realizes he has memorized the steps not to impress anyone, but to belong to his own life. Couples counseling becomes the place where their marriage learns to speak its last language. Lena sits folded into herself, then unfolds, one sentence at a time. They map out fault lines and safe paths with the therapist's steady pencil. There are tears, but no thunder. There is grief that behaves. He hears how his disappearances into work built little deserts she tried to cross. She hears how her laughter became armor that ricocheted off his skin. They don't solve it. They name it with enough accuracy that the blame has nowhere to hide. Final cut. They agree to mediation and a timeline. Mercy folded into procedure. Paperwork day arrives without drama. The way tides arrive whether anyone sings to them. In the courthouse corridor, Armand reads the petition like a weather report. Conditions changing, proceed with caution. Clear skies possible afternoon. He signs his name and feels both heavy and weightless, like a backpack set down after a long climb. Outside, the air is ordinary. Vendors, horns, dust. He buys a bottle of water and drinks it like a first truth. Final cut. He texts Lena one line, filed as disgust, and pockets the phone without waiting for the 3 dots to perform. At night, he returns to the roof with a plate of the curry he made himself. The city hums like a machine he no longer needs to fix to feel useful. He thinks of Rafi not with fire but with ash, cool enough to plant something in. He types a message he will allow only once. I wish you healing. We will not speak for a long time. I mean it. He sends it and turns the phone face down, choosing the taste of his own food over the reflex of checking. Final cut. A stray cat emerges from shadows and sits near him as if to say that companionship can be simple when you stop asking it to be proof. Sunday morning brings a list of small, brave errands. Return the spare key to Lena, repot the stubborn plant, call his aunt, run along the sea until breath writes its own apology. He jogs the promenade where fishermen bargain and children try to kite the wind. A boy's kite nosedives, and Armand catches the string without thinking, sets it back into the current, and hands it over. The boy grins, uncomplicated. It occurs to Armand that he is allowed uncomplicated happiness too. Final cut. As sunlight lifts off the water like forgiveness, he whispers an invitation to the day. Teach me how to stay. Mediation feels like a room designed to keep storms outside. Armand and Lena sit across a table that has seen gentler wars. the mediator's voice turning thunder into minutes and minutes into line items. They divide the furniture as if naming constellations. This one yours, this one mine, this one we retire to the dark. There are pauses where once there were promises. There are nods where once there were fireworks. When the question of the rings arrives, Lena slips hers off as if removing a splinter, and Armin sets his beside it like a twin, returning to the same box after a long detour. Final cut. They initial the final page, pens tapping once in sync, the softest drum roll for an ending that refuses to be noisy. They choose a cafe where the ceiling fans remember their first winter together. The table is the same. The silence isn't. Lena wraps her hands around a cup as if listening through steam. Armin tells her he is learning to cook, that the plant finally decided to live, that he has not blocked Rafi, but has blocked the old pattern that made him easy to lose. She smiles with the kind of respect that arrives too late to be a remedy, but right on time to be a blessing. They sign the temporary living agreement, both careful with their pens, as if the page might bruise. Final cut. When they stand, their hug is short and honest, a bridge built to be crossed once. His aunt keeps wisdom in jars next to cardamom. Armand visits with a box of mangoes and a heart that has stopped trying to win every scene. She listens as he tells the version without villains, only people who got tired in the wrong places. She taps his cheek and says the body is a house. Open the windows, let yesterday out. He eats sweet slices over a metal plate and feels how forgiveness tastes like fruit you didn't grow but are grateful to hold. Final cut. He leaves with a cloth-wrapped tiffin and a permission he didn't know he needed. Live well, not carefully. Move-out day doesn't weep, it sweats. Boxes stack like new paragraphs waiting for the first sentence. Lena labels the last one and leans against the wall as if testing whether it will hold without them. Armand walks each room and says a quiet inventory. The corner where they planned trips, the window that made rain a spectator sport, the door that learned their arrivals. He thanks the space out loud, a ritual that feels silly until it doesn't. When the truck gate slams, the echo sounds like punctuation. Final cut. They stand in the empty living room, touch foreheads once, blessing, benediction, boundary, and lock the door together. Night finds Armand on a photo walk he almost talked himself out of. The city is a theater with no curtain, only lights practicing their lines. He lifts the camera and learns to praise without captions. A rickshaw mirror catching a comet of neon. A shopkeeper sweeping the day into a tidy line. Rain. Starting as if someone whispered, action. He is not collecting proof anymore. He is collecting wonder. Final cut. He frames his own reflection in a storefront and clicks. A self-portrait of a man who finally occupies his name. The decree arrives on an ordinary Tuesday, folded into a courier's canvas bag as if endings were just another errand. Armand sets the paper on the table and lets silence read it first. He does not weep. He breathes, and the breath travels rooms it could not enter before. He messages Lena a simple acknowledgement, and receives one back that feels like a palm pressed briefly to a door from the other side. Outside, the city behaves like weather. Indifferent, generous. He looks around at the life he is building. Small, accurate, fed with intention, and understands that closure is not a wall. It is a gate with his name on it. Final cut. He opens the notebook, writes the day's date beneath the letter to the man he's becoming, and adds 2 words, kept going. He returns the keys to the old apartment, pockets lighter than memory for once. On the stairwell, he hears laughter from a new tenant and recognizes how life inhabits whatever space permits it. At the street, a hawker offers flowers no one asked for. Armand buys 2 stems and tucks them in a bottle on his windowsill later, watching their reflections share the glass with a city that once felt like a verdict and now feels like a promise. Final cut. He lifts his camera and allows beauty to arrive without bargaining. Khadija insists on a celebratory meal that refuses the word celebration. She calls it gratitude. They eat slowly, and he tells her about the cooking class, the photos, the roof cat that now has a name. She smiles the way architects must when a building finally stands, not because it was easy, but because someone kept showing up with bricks. Before he leaves, she presses a small embroidered cloth into his hands, made when promises still frightened her less than time. Final cut. He folds it into his pocket like a map he can read in the dark. One evening, the sea decides to be kind. Armand runs until the stitch loosens and his body feels borrowed back from a long lender. He stops where kites argue with the wind and lets salt air rewrite the margins of his thoughts. A message from an unknown number appears. Rafi's new phone. A short apology that does not ask for an answer. He reads it, places the phone in his pocket, and releases a kite he bought from a boy who swears it will fly even with clumsy hands. Final cut. The string hums, the paper rises, and he learns a physics that grief never taught. Lift is not the absence of weight, but the presence of wind. Later, under a sky busy with constellations that never learned their human names, Armand hosts friends on the roof. Small bowls, big laughter, the cat adjudicating fallen crumbs. Someone asks about love as if it were a city you can only enter with papers. He says he will try again someday, not because he trusts people more than before, but because he trusts himself to leave when the map lies. Music rises from a nearby window, an old song, one he once avoided for the memories it carried. Tonight, it's just a melody doing its job. Final cut. He frames his friends in the camera's rectangle, then lowers it, choosing to keep the moment uncollected, alive where it happened.